For a majority of Yu-Gi-Oh's history, columns and zones didn't really matter. They existed but didn't feel consequential to the gameplay, but this looked like it was changing with the link mechanic. Cards like Broken Line, Fuse Line, and probably the more well-known Infinite Impermanence looked to be the future, but they weren't, or at least in the case of Broken and Fuse Line. But we did get a massive influx of decks that care about columns and zones. We got things like Mech Knight, S-Force, Valance, and to some extent Vanquish Soul and Elf Note, but the archetype we're discussing today is the Weather Painters. This is one of the weirder archetypes in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and in today's video we're going to learn what makes the Weather Painters so unique. But before we get into it, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get started. The Weather archetype debuted in 2017's Spirit Warriors. This is technically the first deck build pack in name, as the preceding packs are referred to as SP boosters, but generally this was not the strongest set. The Secret Six Samurai didn't do much of note, and Magical Musketeer didn't become the next Zodiac like some had prophesized. But Weather Painters are arguably the worst of the three. As the intro implied, this strategy is built around columns and zone placement, with their canvas continuous spells and traps that grant effects to the Weather Painter monster in the same column, and the other Weather Painters in the zones adjacent to that monster. So you can potentially give 3 monsters the same effect, but as we'll see later, it doesn't always work out that way. It's also important to mention that the canvases give the monster the effect rather than activating themselves, but the cost to activate these effects is to banish the monster, which seems like a steep price, but it's okay because all of the main deck monsters have the following effect. Once per turn, during the standby phase of the turn after this card was banished from the field to activate the Weather card's effect, you can special summon this banished card. So as long as you banish them for an in-archetype effect, they would come back. And we'll go through all the monsters, starting with the Weather Painter Snow. When normal summoned, it can place a Weather spell or trap face up in your continuous spell and trap zone. You normal summon it and immediately go +1. But it's interesting to note, it only gets the effect when it's normal summoned. So when it comes back from banishment, it won't get another canvas, which kind of sucks, but it's still a good card. And an interesting thing to note is that your opponent can't ash this card because it places the card face up instead of searching it, which wasn't nearly as common in 2017 as it is now. The rest of the main deck monsters have effects that place the canvases in the spell and trap zone, but in slightly different ways. If Rain is special summoned, it can place a canvas from your hand, which does give you a little flexibility. Thunder can send a face-up continuous spell or trap you control to the graveyard, place a canvas from the deck, so it's probably the second best after Snow. If Sun is in your graveyard, you can send a face-up continuous spell or trap you control to the graveyard, to special summon it, and then place a canvas from your hand in the spell and trap zone. And if another the Weather card you control is sent to the graveyard while you control Cloud, you can target up to 2 canvases in your graveyard and place them face up in the spell and trap zone. And finally we have the level 6 Weather Painter Aurora. When it's normal summoned, it can place a canvas in your spell and trap zone from your hand, deck, or graveyard. And it also prevents your opponent from targeting or destroying your canvases. If this wasn't level 6, it'd probably be the best of the bunch, but it is, although it's not impossible to summon. And the last monster from Spirit Warriors was the Link 3 boss monster, the Weather Painter Rainbow. When your opponent would special summon a monster, quick effect. You can send this Link summon card to the graveyard, negate the summon, and if you do, destroy that monster. Once per turn, during the standby phase of the turn after this card is banished from the field to activate the Weather effect, you can special summon this banished card. The Weather effect monsters this card points to gain the following effect. When a card or effect is activated, quick effect. You can banish this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. This card reads really well. It can negate a summon, but probably most importantly, it turns all your painters into Omni negates, which is crazy powerful. But this card does have a bit of a problem. It requires 3 of the Weather monsters, and the deck is not great at spamming. I think the intent is that you gather enough resources turn by turn to summon it, but even in that situation, you're assuming everything is going your way. But generally, a strong boss monster, just a little tough to summon. But now we move on to the canvas cards, which are kind of the stars of the deck. And each canvas has the following effect. The Weather effect monsters in your main monster zones of this card's column and its adjacent columns gain this effect. And additionally, you can only control 1 of each canvas. Snowy Canvas is the logical place to start, as it allows the monster to banish itself to add the Weather card from your deck to your hand, but you cannot add cards from your deck to your hand for the rest of the turn, except by drawing them. So you do get to search, but in return, you kind of troll yourself, which is kind of funny. I believe it's designed this way so you can't use the search effect multiple times in a turn, even if you chain your monster's effects, but it is kind of brutal. On the bright side though, it is a quick effect, so you can use it on your opponent's turn as well, so you can kind of avoid the lock on your turn. The next one is Rainy Canvas, which allows the monster to banish itself, and then you can target a spell or trap your opponent controls and bounce it to their hand. This one is decent as well. It's a way to interact with your opponent, and it's pretty effective against continuous spells and traps, field spells, and any back row they set during their turn, so you can bounce it during the end phase. And unlike Snowy Canvas, there's no lock, so you can use the effect multiple times. Cloudy Canvas halves the attack of one monster on the field, but in turn allows it to attack directly, making it one of the weaker cards. It does help you protect your monsters as they're not very big, and help them run over opponents' monsters, but I don't think this card is putting a ton of pressure on your opponent. Sunny Canvas is another weird one, allowing you to tribute a monster you control and special summon the weather monster from your hand or grave with a different name from the monster you tributed. I think this one's kinda bad. You have to banish your weather painter, and then you have to tribute another monster to summon one from your hand or grave. I think it's a little too steep of a cost for the effect. But that concludes these spells, and now we'll move on to the traps, starting with Thundery Canvas. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles an opponent's monster, you can banish your Weather Painter monster to return that opponent's monster to the hand. This is one of the best interactions in the deck, as it can bounce monsters, and because it specifically says if this card battles an opponent's monster, it means you can trigger it by attacking, and the effect activates during the damage step, so it's very hard to interact with. And the final card from Spirit Warriors was Auroral Canvas, which allows your painters to banish themselves when either player adds exactly one card from their deck to their hand. That card is banished, and then they draw one card. This card is very interesting as well, but a little better than the previous two. You do give your opponent a draw, but you are effectively banishing whatever card they chose to search, which is pretty powerful. As I mentioned, this is the last card in Spirit Warriors, but 2 years later, we did get a new canvas in Dark Neostorm, that being Rainbowed Canvas. You can only control one, the Weather Rainbowed Canvas. The weather effect monsters in your main monster zones of this card's column and its adjacent columns gain this effect. If your opponent controls a monster, quick effect. You can banish this card. Special summon one the weather monster with a different name from your deck. Also, you cannot special summon other monsters from the deck for the rest of the turn. It does rely on your opponent controlling a monster, but you are effectively able to tag out your monsters, which helps you accrue advantage faster. The only downside is that you can't summon other monsters from the deck for the rest of the turn, so similar to Snowy Canvas, you aren't going to be able to trigger this effect multiple times in a turn. But this card was instrumental in the deck topping a Nebraska Regional in 2019. Von Homerding made top 8 in TOS format, which also included Pendulum Magicians while they still had Electromite. It's a really good deck profile, and I'll have it linked in the description of this video, but for a deck that's generally considered bad, this is an incredible achievement. At this stage, the deck is very reminiscent of early Rockets. The game plan is evident, but gathering the resources to execute it can be very difficult, especially in terms of summoning the boss monster. With Rockets, you could make Borreload if you opened well, but you wouldn't have any Rockets to pair it with. It's the same story with Weather Painters. If you gather the resources to make Rainbow, you'd struggle to have Weather Painters remaining on the field to inherit the negation effect. And additionally, if you didn't open with a canvas and a painter, it was going to be a long day. But in 2022, some of these issues were addressed in Dimension Force, which introduced the most recent additions, and we'll start with the field spell, the Weather Forecast. When this card is activated, you can place one the weather spell or trap from your deck face up in your spell and trap card zone. You can only use each of the following effects of the weather forecast once per turn. If you link summon the weather link monster, you can also use face up the weather cards in your spell and trap card zone as weather monsters for its link summon. During your main phase, you can immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon one the weather monster from your hand. You can only activate one the weather forecast per turn. This card is absurd. It's a +1, helps you get bodies on board, and makes summoning the link monster significantly easier. A huge consistency piece, and being able to use the spells and traps as material for the link summon is important, because the other new card was the Link 3, the Weather Painter Moonbow. If this card is link summoned, you can special summon one of your banished the weather monsters. If this link summon card is destroyed, you can special summon one the Weather Painter Rainbow from your extra deck. The weather effect monsters this card points to gain the following effect. Quick effect, you can banish this card, then target one monster your opponent controls. Banish it until the standby phase of the next turn. The effect the weather painters inherit from the link monster is really strong, and I don't know if this is necessarily better than Rainbow, but it's a nice alternative, and it can summon Rainbow if it gets destroyed, so it doesn't matter too much. The pace the deck plays at often means you have to incorporate floodgates to slow your opponent down, but they do have some synergy with the other cards as they work with generic continuous spells and traps. In general, I don't think this is a bad deck or even gimmick, but there are a few things I'm not a huge fan of. One, the points of interaction aren't the strongest. You do have to consider that technically each canvas could provide 3 interruptions if you have the monsters in its column in the adjacent zones, so each canvas does have to be balanced around that fact, but that's not an easy thing to do, and the interruptions they chose are a little tame. Rainy Canvas bouncing back row is alright, Thundery Canvas bouncing monsters during the damage step is actually exceptional, but the deck could use more threatening interactions. Moonbow and Rainbow provide great interactions for your weather monsters, but it takes some time to get them on board, and as I mentioned earlier, if you do summon them, you might not have painters on board to inherit those effects. I think a simple pop one monster or one card on the field would have been really nice, even if it was designed like Snowy Canvas or Auroral where you can only use the effect once per turn. I also think the deck could use at least one monster that kind of ignores the gimmick and does its own thing. I do applaud Konami for staying consistent with the effects of the monsters, but that might not be a good thing in this case. I made the comparison to rockets earlier, and I think we can circle back to that and look at a card like Rocket Tracer. It still inherits the destruction aspect of rockets, but it's not a traditional rocket, and the card really changed the deck for the better. And lastly, I think the nature of needing a canvas and painter means it's pretty easy to open sub-optimally or just brick entirely. And this isn't me saying 2-card combos are bad, because the deck like Springen's is built on 2-card combos and is fairly consistent, but the difference is that you just need a Springen's name and a way to access the field spell, which is fairly easy. With Weather Painters, there are painters and canvas combinations that just don't work together. If you don't draw into Snowy Canvas, Snow Painter, or Forecast, the duel is probably over, which is pretty unfortunate. Despite the criticism, I think this deck is pretty easily salvageable. It's topped a regional as recently as 2024, and I think 2 or 3 modern cards would bring it up to speed. I think a Link 1, a main deck painter, and a new canvas would do wonders for the deck. And lastly, on the topic of zone and column mechanics, I don't think there's much more that they can do with these strategies. I think the archetypes we have are pretty creative, although Loose the Dust Dark is very interesting along with Mutiny in the Sky, and I could see them taking more steps in that direction. But that's the video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. What's your favorite zone-based archetype or card? Leave it in the comments below, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.